Hey, this is Dalton from Standard Capital, and I am here today with the founders of Momentic.
Hey, how's it going?
All right, well, obviously the news is out that we led the Series A in your company. And so I thought we'd kind of walk through what Momentic does and some background and take it from there.
Yeah, for sure. That sounds great.
Cool. So to start with, give us the high level overview.
Momentic is a testing platform. We help our customers like Notion, Quora, and Build make sure their product is working. So, for example, like if you have a large suite of automated tests like Selenium or Cypress or Playwright, it's typically very difficult to maintain and build, and we make it incredibly easy for them to build and maintain this sort of test automation using plain English.
From my perspective, I've seen a lot of testing products. We talked about this in the past, but there's a lot of people that apply to YC with like QA type things. And QA is not always the most exciting topic, but I think what you guys are doing is really special. And the way I think of it is when you're vibe coding, sometimes weird things happen. Sometimes
Right.
you have a big diff and like some weird stuff gets introduced and breaks. And so you need guardrails to make sure you're not checking in just like totally wrong stuff. And that the more there's vibe coding, the more you need something like Momentic. And so that's my perspective. I was wondering if you guys just wanted to riff on how you're seeing that in practice.
Yeah, for sure. I think the core problem like today is not necessarily like vibe coding. Like we know LLMs can output a ton of code. The problem is like verification. Like how do I make sure the code is actually, doing what I expected? The only way to actually do that is, build your app, deploy it in, in some sort of live environment, whether it's like, your web app or like a mobile device for, Android, iOS, or even like a desktop Electron app. Our goal is for it to serve as like the source of truth for how your product is actually supposed to work and, behave.
What is the terminology you guys use for all the tests that you create? Is it just tests or there's some
Yeah,
other?
I think we call them tests, but I think how our users think about them are these are discrete user journeys through their application. So exactly how, say, for example, I as a user logs into Notion, how I create a page, how I create a database or something like that. Discrete user journeys.
And so when you think about it, it seems like your customer spending all this time putting these tests into your product. It's easy for them to switch to different vibe coding platforms, but it would be pretty hard to switch to something that wasn't Momentic. And so again, our belief as investors is that this seems like a very valuable piece of the software stack.
Exactly. I think like the problem today isn't code output, it's actually verifying that the output is working as expecting. And today you have, like legacy tools like Selenium or Cypress or Playwright, and which takes a ton of time, engineering effort to build and maintain. With Momentic, you're able to describe these flows. Just like, we think, English is going to be the programming language of the future. Like you can describe these flows, they become your guardrails that can actually verify the output of your AI.
So I'd love to hear the backstory of how you guys first met, how you came together, how the company got started.
Yeah, so it's actually really coincidental. I was looking at ideas in the testing space towards the end of 2023. I had been part of this program called the KP Fellows program, and I was doing coffee chats with the head of the program, Alicia Lau. And I was like, "Hey, I'm exploring the testing space," and then she was like, "I know this person, the CTO of Heap, Dan Robinson, at the time, and he was also looking at the space. So it's a bit convoluted, but I grabbed coffee with Dan and I showed Dan what I was working on. Dan was like, okay, you got to talk to this guy called Wei-Wei that I know from a while ago. And I know Wei-Wei's actually actively experimenting in this space as well. And so we hopped on a Google Meets because I think you were in Seattle at
Right.
the time. We basically showed each other what we had. And I think something just clicked. We were like, okay, like, is like something is clearly valuable here. I was working on more of the AI side. Wei had built this fully functional like front end and web app prototype, and we thought that if we'd combine what we built, we'd have something that really worked. And Wei was so excited about this, you actually flew down from Seattle. We spent like a couple of weeks together, just jamming on the idea. We eventually decided that why not apply to YC? I think we were applying like the day of the application deadline.
That's what most people do. That's
Yeah, as it sometimes goes. And funnily enough, I think we're Standard Cap. We also got our application in the day of the deadline. So not a second to spare.
it works. I think founder psychology, and I say this as a former founder myself, is when you have deadlines, you're like, cool, let's just do it on the deadline. That's how I work. So it makes sense to me.
Yeah, it also introduces a really good sense of urgency, I think, towards the deadline. I think you start to enter this really like Zen state at the end.
Totally. Okay, so makes sense. And then did you guys, once you got into YC, was this the same name and the same idea the whole time and it just worked? Or were there troughs of sorrow here?
There's certainly truffle star. I think that's part of every founder journey, but by and large, it's the same idea. The name was actually originally Screenwriter.
Oh,
Wei-Wei had come up with this name, and I think it accurately described what the product was at the time. But we wanted to think about like as we scale the company and potentially offered other products other than browser testing, how would this scale with the company? And so we settled on the Momentic because it felt like something that was like really similar to Momentum and really sort of like natural to developers thinking about like their own velocity. But the idea stayed the same throughout the whole batch and is still the same. We actually always had this idea in the back of our head that like, are we going to have to pivot or change our idea at some point? Like we saw a lot of batchmates, going through that process. And in some ways, like iterating kind of brings you like a sense of confidence that like, through revisions, like you kind of ultimately settled on the right idea. But we never really had a reason to kind of doubt our original conviction. And both of us come from dev tooling backgrounds and we worked with a lot of these like legacy tools. And we really wanted to apply AI to this space. And so I think like because of like our natural kind of experience and like tendencies there, we stuck with the idea and here we are today.
I mean, it's funny, like, again, as an investor, I think it's easy to write off some of this market as the TAM is not big enough. But again, I think the opportunity here is because vibe coding is such a big TAM and is growing. This could be way bigger than what we currently think of as of the testing market. Like you just have to have a vision about that, and it seems like you guys do.
Exactly. I think like how we see the market is every software team, every piece of software has to make sure it actually works. And it's not just QA teams, it's not just testing teams, it's everyone who's creating and building software.
I'd love to hear some case studies. I know you guys have great customers that are super fancy and will help people learn about the company. So you want to pick a couple of case studies?
Yeah, for sure. Like happy to share, like one of our favorite customers is Notion. Like they were coming from a really large suite of Selenium that they were spending a lot of time maintaining and updating. And now today, every engineer at Notion has to have their Momentic tests pass before they can merge and deploy. We execute millions a week with 5 nines of reliability. So like really high volume, really great coverage. And like, we started with web. Now we're going into mobile. So like Android, iOS, and, desktop software, in the next few quarters.
How did you get Notion as a customer? Did they just find you on the internet?
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting story. Simon actually posted on Twitter. This was back in, I think, October of 2024. He posted something along the lines of like, it would be really great if we could just describe what I wanted to do and a test or like something would test it for me. And, a lot of people were tagging their favorite tools in the comments. Like at the time, I was actually visiting San Francisco, working with Jeff and our founding engineer, Henry. A lot of people tagged Momentic and me. I put together a meme for him. Actually, it was like a 2-pane layout of like, tools like Cypress and, Playwright, Selenium. You have to maintain it yourself. And then like the big brain moment was like you use Momentic. But I actually like DM'd him. I onboarded him that night at like 10 p.m. And then we went through, he was impressed enough where we went through like a official POC process. And, we now Notion's like, officially has been a customer for better part of a year now.
I don't know if that scales, but I like it. That's doing things that don't scale up there, right?
Yeah. Of course. And I think like the main things we want to help our customers see is like tangible efficiency gains and ROI from Momentic. So like, for example, we just published this case study with Quora, the po.com team. We were able to actually help reduce their QA cycle from 7 hours to 30 minutes. It was like a 14x speed up. And, that's all through automation. You build it once, you run it forever. They run, thousands of Momentic tests every single day. But like that's our main goal. We want to be helpful to teams building awesome software.
I know one of your guys' biggest problems, it's a high class problem, is now you're hiring. You've raised your Series A, and unlike when you're a batch company where it's like, don't worry about hiring, you guys are starting to hire and building your culture. And so I'd love to hear some of your pitch for candidates that might be interested in working in Momentic, because probably they might be watching this video or someone they know is watching this video. So I'd love to hear what you think.
I think there's a few things here. One is like the opportunity for impact is absolutely massive. Like we're literally changing how software is verified, as you said, much like Cursor changed how software is built. If we're successful, that means that like we can save millions of eng hours. It means that we can dramatically improve the quality of the average software products that we ship. We can completely redefine a core part of the developer experience that has been more or less the same for about two decades. And so any feature that you ship, that you build, is immediately going to see the light of day. You're going to get that opportunity to interact closely with our users who use Pylon. So you'll just get DMs on Slack pretty immediately after you publish, especially for those who feel empowered by helping others and helping scale others' impact. I think it's a wonderful opportunity. I think the second part of this is that we have a very unique class of problems in that our problems are both important, high scale, and they're new. So usually I feel like you get to pick one of those three. Like you either get to work on something that's like important, but like maybe only matters for a handful of people, or something that is, like high scale, but it has been around for 2 decades and the underlying infrastructure isn't really changing. Whereas for us, we are at the bleeding edge, and we learn new things about like LLMs and AI architecture every single day. But our problems are still very high scale. We process now over 1 billion tokens per hour
Oh, cool.
at peak. We got actually the OpenAI puck a couple of weeks ago. I think that's the mark of success.
Yeah, way to
Like
go. You did it.
Yeah.
You got the plaque.
Yeah.
One thing I always like to ask founders, because you're the ones building the future, is just to make some predictions about what you think software development looks like in a few years, right? You have a front row seat to how people are using these tools and testing these tools. What's your prediction of how the space goes?
Yeah. I think we're seeing the definition of software engineering change, every single day. Like the definition of who can be a software engineer, the barrier for entry is much lower today than it was, say, a year or two ago. And I think part of that is there's also a lot of consolidation. In a lot of companies, and especially larger ones, it's actually very common to have a dedicated QA or SDET team who owns testing or building automation that's actually sits completely separately than the engineering team, who say like if their core responsibility is building and updating product. And I think we're seeing consolidation of those responsibilities. Over the past few years, the term shift left has been thrown around a lot, probably, way too much, overused, but we are actually seeing that happen. Teams are shifting testing locally as close to where the development is happening. I'm using Cursor, I'm using Cloud Code locally. I also want to be able to test that locally as well. And, at every stage, in CI, before I deploy, before I merge, and all the way to production, like running my smoke test in production and staging or UAT. So I think there's definitely like a big consolidation of responsibility.
Yeah.
And
It's happening with PMs too, right? Or the line between a software engineer and a PM seems like it's blurring. Are you guys seeing?
yeah, exactly. I think at Momentic we don't plan to hire a PM anytime soon, but
Yeah.
we do have a designer. We have a lot of engineers. It's easier today than ever than to go from just an idea to a prototype and actually making sure it works in like minutes or seconds.
It seems like you guys are solving one of the big criticisms people have of vibe coding, which is just like, what is it? Write once, never read, write only. Am I getting that right? Write only software. Do you guys get what I'm saying? Which is like, you can crank out a lot of stuff, but it's just total crap and impossible to maintain.
Yeah, it's just like the difference between like slop and product is like, does it actually work the way you want it to? That's the main difference. I can probably vibe code a to-do list like really quickly, but does it handle syncing across multiple devices? Does it handle recurring tasks? Like, I don't know, maybe. But
And it has to work over time as well. It's easy to make something that works now for one user, but as soon as you have scale and as soon as you have feature requests, does it continue to perform as expected?
I mean, that's something Sam always talks about, is how increasingly you can one-shot pretty sophisticated software. Once you one-shotted something, you need to improve it. You kind of need something like Momentic to make sure you're not hosing yourself, right? Like,
Exactly. It's like, it's not like software is all just going to be every feature or every update is bolted on, by like with like duct tape with like, hey, I one shotted this with whatever AI coding tool I did. And, now it works perfectly.
and so final thing, look, you guys are one of the first portfolio companies in Standard Capital. And so I'd love if you could just share with folks, why you chose us. I know you would have many, many options of investor partners. So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, for sure. I think like there's like two main things we were like really drawn to Standard is like one, there was an application process where, we actually set the terms that we wanted.
Yeah.
And, it was application to term sheet within 2 weeks, which is, almost unheard of for a Series A. And I think the other part is there's this peer group of companies in similar stages to us where, we're going through the same things. We're figuring out, hey, what are the different marketing channels? What are outbound? How do we, grow and scale a sales team or something like that? These are all things that we get immense value from, like learning from peer companies who are going through like a similar stage of their startup journey. And, those two are like kind of the main reasons we really love Standard.
That's great. And you can say this on camera, but like some founders I've seen, wait, these guys really don't negotiate on price. You really just put in your valuation in the application and then get the deal.
Yeah, like yeah, literally, we wrote it down, and it was, we'd like to fund you, and then I was like, oh, that's easier than I thought, or like quicker than I thought, or more simpler than I thought.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for talking to me today, guys. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having us.